At Thanksgiving dinner last year, my grandson looked up from his mashed potatoes and asked, "Grandpa, how come you live in a little apartment when Grandma's money paid for our big house?" My son-in-law's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. My daughter's face went the color of the tablecloth. I set down my glass very slowly and said, "What did you just say, buddy?" My grandson smiled, completely unaware of what he'd just detonated. "Daddy told Mommy that Grandma's insurance paid for our house. Didn't you know?" I knew. In that single moment, sitting at a table I'd been invited to out of obligation rather than love, I knew everything. My wife passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. We'd been married 39 years, and she was meticulous about 2 things, her garden and her finances. She carried a life insurance policy worth $580,000 that she'd paid into for decades. Money she always said was Harold's cushion for when I'm gone. She never let me touch it, never let me argue about it. "You'll thank me someday," she used to say. She had no idea how right she was. When she died, I was 63, retired from 32 years as a CPA, living on Social Security and a modest pension. The insurance payout was supposed to be my independence. The paperwork named me as sole beneficiary. But grief does strange things to a person, and in those first weeks after the funeral, I wasn't thinking clearly about anything. My daughter stepped in, the way she always did, efficient and kind and organized. She handled the service, the flowers, the thank you cards. When I mentioned the insurance paperwork, she said she'd taken care of it. She'd filed the claim. She'd set up the transfer. I was so hollowed out that I just nodded and let her handle it. For 4 years, I assumed the money sat in an account somewhere, a safety net I hadn't needed to touch yet. I kept expecting a statement, a notification, something. When I asked my daughter about it, she always said the same thing. "It's all taken care of, Dad. Stop worrying." I stopped asking. I figured I'd get to it when I was ready. What I didn't figure was that 4 years of "it's all taken care of" meant something entirely different than what I thought it meant. My grandson is 7 years old. He has his grandmother's eyes and his father's habit of saying exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong moment. After dinner, I helped carry plates to the kitchen. My son-in-law stayed at the table with his phone, scrolling. My daughter ran water in the sink with her back to me, scrubbing a pan that didn't need scrubbing. My grandson had already disappeared to his room, cheerful and oblivious. I picked up a dish towel. "You want to explain what he meant," I said. "Dad, he's 7. He overheard something he didn't understand. He understood enough to repeat it pretty clearly." She turned off the water. Her shoulders were rigid under her sweater. "This isn't the time." "When is the time?" I kept my voice level. 32 years of sitting across from clients who'd committed tax fraud taught me that the moment you raise your voice, you lose. "Because I've been waiting for the right time for 4 years. Tell me the insurance money is in an account somewhere with my name on it, and I'll apologize for ruining Thanksgiving." She didn't say it. I set the dish towel on the counter, walked back through the dining room where my son-in-law was still looking at his phone, and said good night. He didn't look up. I drove home to my apartment, sat down at my kitchen table, and started making a list the way I'd been trained to do for 3 decades when something didn't add up. 4 years, $580,000. A house they bought 18 months after my wife died, in a neighborhood they couldn't have afforded on their combined salary, a 5-bedroom colonial with a finished basement and a 3-car garage, the kind of house that costs $650,000 at minimum in that zip code. A son-in-law who quit his IT job 2 years ago to pursue entrepreneurship without any visible product. A daughter who always changed the subject when money came up. The math was not complicated. I'd been doing math my whole life. The next morning, I called my old colleague, Frank Briggs. We'd worked together at the same accounting firm for 15 years before he pivoted to estate law. He'd been at my wife's funeral. He was the kind of man who answered the phone before 8 in the morning and didn't make you explain why you needed to meet urgently. "Bring everything you have," he said. "I'll put the coffee on." Everything I had wasn't much. My copy of my wife's life insurance policy, her death certificate, a few letters I'd saved from the insurance company confirming the claim was filed, a printout I'd made years ago of what the payout should look like. Frank spread it all on his desk and read quietly for 10 minutes. The claim was filed by your daughter as authorized representative, he said. Given that you were the named beneficiary, she would have needed a signed document from you granting her that authority. Did you sign anything in those first few weeks? I closed my eyes. After the funeral, there had been paperwork. A lot of paperwork. I'd signed things without reading them. My daughter handed me a pen and pointed to lines, and I signed because I was 63 years old, and my wife, of 39 years, was gone, and I didn't care about paperwork. I may have, I said. Then legally she had the authority to file. The question is where the funds went after that. Frank pulled up something on his computer. If the payout went into a joint account you didn't control, or directly into an account in her name, that's a different matter. Getting those records will take some work, but it's possible. He looked at me. Harold, I want to be direct with you. This could be a misunderstanding about how the funds were held, or it could be theft. I won't know which until we pull the records. It's not a misunderstanding, I said. They bought a $650,000 house 18 months after my wife died. Frank nodded slowly. Let me make some calls. I drove home and sat in my apartment and thought about all the Thanksgivings and Christmases and birthday dinners I'd attended over the past 4 years, sitting at their table, eating food cooked in a kitchen built with my wife's money, sleeping in the guest room of a house that should have been my security, my son-in-law asking if I wanted more wine, my daughter making sure I had plenty of leftovers to take home, the casual generosity of people who'd already taken everything. There's a particular cold that settles into your chest when betrayal becomes certain. It's not anger yet. Anger comes later. First, there's just this quiet, crystalline clarity, like the moment a CPA finds the discrepancy that unravels an entire set of books. Everything looks different. Everything you thought you understood needs to be recalculated. I was still a CPA. I was retired, but that doesn't mean the skills go away. I spent 3 days going through every financial document I could find. Bank statements I'd saved over the years, investment records, the property tax records available publicly online, county court filings. Frank sent me what he'd found. The insurance payout of $580,000 had been transferred into a money market account, opened in my daughter's name alone. 1 week after the claim was filed, 2 months after my wife died. 18 months later, $540,000 had moved to the purchase of the Colonial on Ridgemont Drive. The remaining $40,000 was gone in smaller withdrawals over the following year. The account had never had my name on it. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I called my grandson's school, confirmed he had a half-day on Friday, and texted my daughter to ask if I could take him to lunch. She responded in 4 minutes, warm and normal. Of course, Dad. He'd love that. What time should I drop him off? The ease of it turned my stomach. At lunch, my grandson ate a cheeseburger and talked about his soccer team and showed me a loose tooth. He had no memory of what he'd said at Thanksgiving. He'd already moved on to other things the way children do, unburdened by the consequences of their honesty. I drove him home, and when my daughter came to the door, I looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. Whatever she saw in my face made her put a hand on my grandson's shoulder and send him inside quickly. Dad, I know about the account, I said. I know about the transfer. I know where the money went. I kept my voice the same way I'd kept it for 32 years, delivering bad news to clients. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to make a scene in front of your son. But you and I are going to have a conversation, and it needs to happen soon. She said nothing. Her eyes filled, but she said nothing. I'll be in touch, I said, and walked back to my car. That evening, I called Frank and told him what I'd confirmed. He listened and then said, quietly, Harold, you have a case. Misappropriation of a named beneficiary's funds. It's not clean because you signed the authorization, but combined with the paper trail and the fact that the funds never touched an account in your name, you have significant legal leverage. Do you want to pursue it? Not yet, I said. Not the legal route. Not yet. What do you want to do? I looked around my apartment. 700 square feet. The couch my wife and I had brought from our old house because it was the most comfortable couch we'd ever owned. Her reading lamp in the corner that I'd never moved. The bookshelf with the photo of us at our 30th anniversary. Her laughing at something I'd just said. Her head tipped back, completely happy. I want them to feel what it's like, I said. To have everything they thought was secure suddenly feel like it's not. Frank was quiet for a moment. You know I can't advise anything illegal. I'm a retired accountant, I said. I'm not going to break any laws. I'm going to do what accountants do. I'm going to audit them. Frank laughed despite himself. Lord help them, he said. Call me when you need the legal side. Here's the thing about being a CPA that most people don't appreciate. You develop a very particular set of skills around information. You learn how to find things. You learn what questions to ask, and more importantly, what questions the other person doesn't want you to ask. You learn how financial anxiety works, how people who've done something wrong live in constant low-level terror of the one document, the one phone call, the one moment that brings it all down. My son-in-law fancied himself a businessman. He had a company registered in the state, an LLC he'd formed 2 years ago. I looked it up. No reported revenue. No filed tax returns for the business for the past 2 years. That was a problem with the IRS that he apparently hadn't addressed. And problems with the IRS tend to compound. I wrote an anonymous letter. I have good penmanship. My wife always said it was one of my most underrated qualities. I wrote it by hand on plain paper, mailed it from the post office across town. The letter was brief and precise, the way a CPA writes. It noted the unregistered revenue, the unfiled returns, the potential exposure. It was addressed to my son-in-law at his home address. It was signed, a concerned colleague. I knew from 30 years of experience what a letter like that does to a person who has something to hide. It doesn't matter that it's vague. It doesn't matter that it proves nothing. What it does is make the world feel suddenly, terrifyingly small. It makes every person you know into a potential threat. It makes you check your mail with your heart beating too fast. It makes you go back through everything you've done, inventorying your exposure, and that inventory always turns up more than you expected. 3 days after I mailed the letter, my son-in-law filed 2 years of back business returns through an online preparer. I know because his business registration is public record and the state updated the filing status. He paid $4,200 in penalties. That was money he hadn't planned on spending. Good. I wasn't done. My daughter's car was registered under a financing agreement that I now understood was structured using funds from the insurance payout, one of the smaller withdrawals in that final $40,000. I wrote a second letter, this one to the financing company, noting a potential discrepancy in the income documentation used to secure the loan. I didn't lie. I simply raised a question. The financing company sent an audit notice. My daughter spent 2 weeks gathering documents she'd hoped never to gather again. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't proud of any of this. I'm a man who spent 32 years telling clients that the right way to handle a financial problem was to confront it directly, disclose it honestly, and make it right. I had given that speech hundreds of times. I was now very deliberately not following my own advice, and I knew it. But there is something that happens to a person who discovers they've been eating Thanksgiving dinner in a house built on their wife's memory, year after year, while the people serving them smiled and passed the rolls. Something that makes you set aside the speech you've given 100 times and find the cold, methodical part of yourself that just wants the ledger to balance. My grandson called me the following Sunday from my daughter's phone. He wanted to tell me about a project he'd made at school. A papier-mâché volcano that had actually erupted in class. He was enormously pleased with himself. I listened and laughed in the right places and told him I was very proud of him and asked about his loose tooth. He said it was wobbling more now. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a while. That child had no part in any of this. He'd simply told the truth, the way children do, because nobody had told him it was a truth that needed to be kept. My daughter texted me that evening. Dad, I need to talk to you. Things are stressful here. Can we meet? I didn't respond. Frank called that week with more. His contact at the county recorder's office had found something in the property documents I hadn't noticed. The house on Ridgemont Drive had a home equity line of credit opened against it 18 months ago. $180,000 borrowed against the equity. That money had gone somewhere. Frank's contact traced it through the business account. My son-in-law's LLC had received a large consulting payment from a shell company that Frank suspected was just another account they controlled. They borrowed against a house bought with stolen money to fund a business that doesn't appear to actually do anything, Frank said. They are in serious financial trouble, Harold. The kind that doesn't resolve quietly. How much trouble? Between the HELOC, the credit cards I've found in the public collections filings, and the IRS exposure from the back returns, I'd estimate they're $300,000 in debt above the value of their equity. If something forced a sale of that house today, they'd walk away owing money. I wrote that number down. $300,000. My wife's $580,000, which should have been my cushion, had been turned into $300,000 of debt. That took a particular kind of financial incompetence layered on top of a particular kind of moral failure. I sat with that for a long time. My daughter texted again. "Dad, please. I know you know. Please just talk to me." I read it 3 times and set my phone face down on the table. The audit notice from the financing company came due. My daughter had to appear in person at a regional office with documentation. She brought my son-in-law, and from what Frank heard through his contact, the meeting was not pleasant. There were questions about the source of funds. There were discrepancies between the income she'd claimed and the tax returns on file. Nothing criminal had been established, but the flag was up now, and flags have a way of attracting more attention. My son-in-law stopped filing into his usual Sunday morning routine at the coffee shop he frequented. I know because I'd started occasionally sitting in my car across the street, not doing anything, just watching. I am 67 years old, and I was conducting surveillance from a Buick LeSabre with a cup of gas station, coffee, and if my wife could have seen me, she would have told me I'd lost my mind, and also that I needed a better coat. She would have been right on both counts. But the thing I saw in those few minutes every Sunday was not a man living comfortably with what he'd done. I saw a man who was losing weight he didn't have to lose, who looked at his phone every 90 seconds, who once sat in that coffee shop for 40 minutes and never actually ordered anything, just sat there staring at the door like he was waiting for something terrible to arrive. Good. Let him wait. Then came the moment that changed everything, the way these moments always do, arriving not when you're prepared for them, but when you're sitting in your kitchen eating cereal at 7 in the morning. My daughter called. Not a text. A call. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in the frequency of the ring, the sheer persistence of it, made me answer. "He's in the hospital." Her voice was the flattest I'd ever heard it. The voice of someone who has been crying for so long they've gone past tears into something quieter and more frightening. "He collapsed at the gym yesterday morning. They're running tests. They think it might be his heart." I set down my spoon. "Which hospital?" "Street Thomas." "Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I know what we did, but I've been here since yesterday, and I'm alone, and I don't know what's going to happen, and I just needed to hear your voice." I stayed on the line without saying anything for a moment. Through the phone, I could hear the background hum of a hospital, the PA system, the distant beeping of machines. The same sounds I'd listened to for 6 months while my wife was dying. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. She was in a waiting room on the 3rd floor, still in yesterday's clothes, a paper cup of cold coffee in her hands. She looked like she hadn't slept. When she saw me come through the door, she stood up and then seemed unsure what to do with herself, caught between wanting to be held by her father and knowing she'd forfeited the easy comfort of that. I sat down in the chair beside her. I didn't hug her, but I stayed. We sat there for 2 hours before a doctor came out. Her husband had suffered a cardiac event. He would live, but there would be procedures, recovery, changes. He was stable. She could see him in an hour. When the doctor left, she put her face in her hands. I waited. "I need to tell you something," she said, without looking up. "And I need you to actually hear it, not so it changes what you do, but because you deserve to know the truth. The whole truth. Not what you've figured out. What I know." "I'm listening," I said. She told me. It took a long time, and she cried through most of it. The version I'd reconstructed from documents, and public records was accurate but incomplete. The way a financial audit is always technically accurate, but never captures the full human story underneath the numbers. 4 years ago, immediately after my wife died, while I was barely functional with grief, my son-in-law had approached my daughter with a plan. He'd been struggling at his job, on the verge of being let go. He'd found a business opportunity he was convinced would work if he could just get the initial capital. And there was my wife's insurance payout, sitting in an account my daughter had access to, earmarked for a man who was too grief-stricken to look at a bank statement. He told me it would be temporary, she said. He said we'd pay it back within 2 years. He had projections. He had a whole plan. She wiped her face. I knew it was wrong. I knew it the moment I agreed to it. But he was so certain, and I was scared of losing him. And I told myself you'd never need it right away. That by the time you did, we'd have it back. The business failed, I said. Within the first year, and then he started the next thing. And that one failed too. And by then we'd bought the house because he said we needed the asset, and we were in it so deep that I didn't know how to get out. She looked at me directly for the first time. I've spent 3 years trying to figure out how to fix it without you ever finding out. I've been putting money aside from my salary, a separate account he doesn't know about. I have $38,000 in it. I was going to tell you at Christmas. I know that doesn't change anything. I know $38,000 isn't $580,000. I just needed you to know I never stopped trying to make it right. I sat with that for a long time. The father part of me, the part that had driven 20 minutes to sit in a hospital waiting room for a man I had been systematically making miserable for weeks, understood what I was hearing. My daughter had been coerced. Not violently, not crudely, but in the way that happens in marriages, the slow accumulation of someone else's certainty, overriding your own judgment until you're in too deep to see the shore. But the accountant part of me, the part that had spent 3 decades sitting across tables from people explaining why they'd done what they'd done, knew that understanding why was not the same as erasing what happened. My wife's money. My wife's decades of careful payments into a policy she called Harold's Cushion, gone, to fund a failed LLC and a colonial house and a lifestyle that was always, at its foundation, built on something stolen. I need you to hear something now, I said. She nodded. I know about the anonymous letters. I know about the audit. I know about the IRS filings. I paused. I sent them. She stared at me. I spent the last several weeks making your lives significantly more uncomfortable, I said. Not illegally, but deliberately and methodically. Because I wanted you to feel, in a small way, what it's like to have your security pulled out from under you without warning. I kept my voice even. I'm not apologizing for that. But I'm telling you now so we can stop pretending we're operating with incomplete information. She was quiet for a very long time. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. Not happily, but there was something real in it. Frank Briggs, she said. Frank Briggs, I wondered. She looked at the ceiling. The letter about the tax returns. That was so precisely worded. I told him it felt like a CPA wrote it. She shook her head slowly. He didn't believe me. We sat in silence for a while. The hospital hummed around us. Somewhere down the hall, a family was having a different conversation, and somewhere else, someone was getting good news, and somewhere else, someone was getting the kind of news you don't recover from. The whole ordinary machinery of crisis, running quietly in all directions. What happens now? She asked. I don't know yet, I said. Let me think. I went to see Frank the following morning. He had the legal analysis ready, the options laid out the way a good attorney lays things out. Clean, unsentimental, practical. Option 1. Pursue civil litigation. Given the paper trail, the signed authorization that could be argued was obtained under duress given my state of grief, and the clear misuse of the funds, Frank estimated a strong case. Timeline. 18 months to 2 years. Cost. $30,000 to $50,000 in legal fees. Outcome. Likely a judgment in my favor, but collecting from people who are $300,000 underwater is a different matter from obtaining the judgment. Option 2. Negotiate a settlement. Deed transfer wasn't applicable here the way it was in other cases, but there were other structures. A formal repayment agreement, secured against the equity in the house. A payment schedule with legal consequences for default. Documentation of the $38,000 my daughter had already saved, applied immediately. Option 2 gets you real money over time, Frank said. Option 1 gets you a piece of paper that may or may not translate into real money depending on whether they ever get solvent. What would you do? I asked. Frank took his glasses off, polished them, which is what he always does when he's about to say something he's thought about carefully. I'd think about what your wife would do, he said. She set that money aside for you, not as a weapon. As a cushion. What does a cushion feel like to you right now? I drove home and called my daughter. Her husband was being moved to a regular room. The prognosis was good, pending some lifestyle changes. She answered on the second ring. I want to make a proposal, I said, and I want you to write it down. I told her the terms, the $38,000 immediately to an account in my name. A formal repayment agreement, drafted by Frank, secured against the house, for the remaining balance, at a realistic figure we'd negotiate. Not $580,000, I wasn't delusional about what was collectible, but a number that acknowledged the debt was real and would be paid. Monthly payments, a schedule with teeth, legal consequences for default. In exchange, I said, I pull back. The audit flag gets cleared, which was going to happen anyway. No litigation, no criminal referrals. You have a chance to fix it. She was quiet for a long time. What about us? She asked. What about you and me? I looked out my window at the parking lot of my apartment complex. 700 square feet. My wife's reading lamp reflecting in the glass. That's a separate question, I said. The money question has an answer. The other question takes time. She said she needed to talk to her husband. I said I expected she would. I told her she had 72 hours, and then Frank was filing the paperwork. My son-in-law called me the next evening. It was the first time he'd called me in 4 years that wasn't a courtesy call at Christmas. His voice sounded different. Hospital humbled, Frank would later call it. He said he understood the terms. He said he wanted to add something. I know there's nothing I can say, he started. Correct, I said. But I need you to understand that she fought me on it. Every time, at every step, she told me it was wrong. I overrode her. That's the truth. Whatever you think about her, she tried. I didn't say anything. I was scared, he said. Not that that matters, but I want you to know I was scared and stupid, and I convinced myself it would work out, and I cost you something that can't be replaced. Not just the money. I know what your wife meant to that fund. His voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment. 32 years of accounting teaches you when a number is real, and when it's been adjusted to look better than it is. His voice didn't have the sound of adjustment in it. The papers will be at Frank's office Thursday, I said. Have your attorney review them. Sign them by Friday. They signed Friday morning. Frank called at 11 to confirm. It's done, he said. You'll have the wire for the $38,000 by end of day. The repayment agreement kicks in first of next month. I said thank you and hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a while. I thought about making coffee, and then didn't. My wife had this thing she used to say when one of our daughter's childhood arguments finally resolved itself, usually after days of drama and tears and door slamming. Well, it only took 10 times longer than it needed to. She'd say it dryly, over her reading glasses, and it always made me laugh. I heard her say it very clearly in the silence of my kitchen, in that voice that's been living in my memory for 4 years. It only took 10 times longer than it needed to. The money began coming in monthly. Not large amounts, but consistent. The way consistent is supposed to work. Frank checked the transfers every month and reported in. I moved the funds into a savings account and let them accumulate. I didn't touch them. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with them yet. My wife would have had opinions about that. My grandson lost his tooth. My daughter texted me a photo, his enormous gap-toothed grin, holding up the small tooth like he'd found treasure. She didn't add any words to the message. She didn't need to. I saved the photo, and after a while I wrote back. Tell him the tooth fairy has good taste. My daughter wrote back 3 minutes later. A single word. Dad. That was October. In November, my grandson called me from his own tablet, video call, unprompted, to show me a caterpillar he'd found in the backyard. He held the tablet too close to his face the whole time, so I mostly saw a large, excited eye and the occasional glimpse of a caterpillar on a leaf. I told him it looked like a very significant caterpillar. He agreed that it was probably the best caterpillar in the state of Tennessee. I didn't go to Thanksgiving that year. My daughter didn't push. I spent the day at Frank's house with his family, ate too much, fell asleep in an armchair in front of a football game, and woke up to Frank's youngest asking me if I was dead. I told him not yet. He seemed satisfied with that. Christmas I went. Not overnight, just Christmas Eve dinner. My son-in-law answered the door, and we looked at each other for a moment. He looked like a man who'd spent a year carrying something heavy and recently put it down, not fully recovered, but beginning to feel what standing upright was supposed to feel like. I gave him a nod. He stepped back to let me in. That was all that happened, and it was enough for that evening. My grandson was incandescent with Christmas anticipation. He showed me every ornament on the tree and told me the origin story of each one, most of which he'd invented on the spot. I admired them all. At dinner, he sat next to me and told me about a book he was reading about volcanoes, and asked me if I had ever seen a real volcano, and I said not yet, but I thought we should probably fix that. His eyes went enormous. We could go? Someday, I said. When you're a little older. Hawaii has volcanoes. He looked at his mother. Mom, Grandpa says we can go to Hawaii. My daughter caught my eye over his head. I saw something shift in her face. Something complicated and careful. An emotion that didn't have a simple name. We'll see, she said. That means yes, my grandson told me, confidentially. Driving home that night, I thought about what Frank had said, about what my wife would have done. I thought about her meticulousness, her decades of payments into a policy she managed alone so I wouldn't have to think about it. I thought about what it had meant for her to carry that quietly, year after year, not as a transaction, but as an act of love planned 40 years in advance. You can't put a number on that. I'd been a CPA for 32 years, and I was absolutely certain you could not put a number on that. The $580,000 was recoverable, partially, over time, with legal structure and Frank's oversight. What it had stood for was something else entirely, and no repayment agreement addressed it, and no amount of Thanksgiving dinners or Christmas Eve visits would either, at least not directly. What addressed it, maybe, was my grandson on a video call holding a caterpillar 2 inches from the camera. What addressed it, maybe, was my daughter's face over his head at dinner, carrying the weight of what she'd allowed and the beginning of what she was trying to rebuild. What addressed it was time, the kind that passes not loudly but in small, ordinary moments that accumulate into something you only recognize as healing when you look back at how bad the before was. I'm not a man given to speeches. My wife was the eloquent one. When she died, I found a box she'd kept under her side of the bed, with letters she'd written to me over the years. Some going back to when we were first married. None of them ever given to me, just written and kept. The most recent one, dated 3 months before she died, said, "You are going to be fine, Harold. You are stubborn and meticulous, and you love harder than you know. You are going to be fine." I didn't feel fine for a long time. I'm not sure fine is quite the right word now either, but I'm paying attention to my grandson's caterpillar and his gap-toothed grin and the way he says my name like it's the most normal and reliable thing in the world, to the monthly transfers that show up in my account with the clockwork regularity of atonement, to the way Frank laughs when he calls to confirm them, the satisfied laugh of a man who likes it when the numbers come out right, to the photo of my wife on the bookshelf, her head tipped back, laughing at something I said, completely happy. I'm paying attention. That's the only math I'm doing now. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe to Arcane Vengeance and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done? I read every single one.